morning, Division 15. It's Lion here, continuing to read The Magic Treehouse, and we've been working through them fast. Ah, la, la. We are about to start number 10, which is called Ghost Town at Sundown. And as you can see from the front, Jack and Annie are, they're dressed like cowboys, aren't they? They've got cowboy hats on, and they are looking like they're in a ghost town. There's the name. So let's get started. Miss Lion has been very bad and not wearing her glasses lately, so I'm trying to do that again. Chapter 1 is called How Wild. Jack and Annie were sitting on the porch of their house, and Annie was gazing down the street at Frog Creek Woods. Jack was reading a book. I got a feeling we should check the woods again, said Annie. Well, why? Said Jack, without looking up. A rabbit's hopping by. So, we've seen rabbits before. Not like this kind of rabbit, said Annie. Well, what do you mean? Said Jack, and he stood up to look at her. He saw a rabbit with very long legs hopping down the street, and soon the rabbit left the side street and headed into the woods. He's a sign, said Annie. Well, a sign of what? Said Jack. Oh, just come on. But what about dinner? Said Jack. Dad said it would be ready really soon. Don't worry, said Annie. You know when we leave in the treehouse, time stops. So Annie ran across their yard. Jack pulled up the backpack and back in 10 minutes, he yelled through the screen door to his family, and then he followed Annie. They hurried down the street into Frog Creek Woods. The sun was setting above the trees. Oh, it's here, said Annie. The rabbit was standing in the ray of sunlight, and then he saw them and he took off again. Jack and Annie followed the rabbit until he vanished behind the tallest tree. I told you, see, said Annie, panting, and she pointed up to the treehouse. Morgan Le Fay was waving to them from the magic treehouse high in the branches. Jack and Annie waved back to her, as always, and Jack was very happy to see the enchanted librarian again. Come on, she called. Jack and Annie started up the rope ladder. They climbed up to the treehouse. We followed a strange rabbit here, said Annie. Is he a friend of yours? Perhaps, said Morgan. She smiled mysteriously. I have many odd friends in the world. Including us, said Annie. Morgan laughed. Yes, that's right. How are you? Asked Jack. Well, you see, I'm still having problems with Merlin, said the enchantress, which leaves me very little time to do my real work. But soon you will both become master librarians, and that will be a big help to me. Jack smiled. He was going to be a master librarian who traveled through time and space. It was almost too good to believe. Are you ready to solve another riddle? Yes, said Jack and Annie, together. Good, said Morgan. First, you're going to need this for research. She pulled a book from her robe and handed it to Jack. It was the book that would help them on their journey. The title of the book was Days of the Wild West. On the cover was a picture of a western town on a prairie. Oh, wow, said Annie. The Wild West? Jack took a deep breath. Just how wild was the Wild West? Morgan reached into the folds of her robe and again pulled out a scroll. She handed it to Annie. Read this when the treehouse lands, she said. Oh, is it a riddle? Said Jack. Yes, said Morgan. And then you'll only have 2 more to solve. Are you ready to go now? Jack and Annie nodded. Annie pointed to the picture on the cover of the Wild West book. I wish we could go there, she said. The wind began to blow. Goodbye, Morgan. Good luck. The treehouse began to spin. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. Then everything was still, absolutely still. Jack opened his eyes. Morgan Le Fay was gone, and a fly was buzzing around his head. Chapter 2, Rattlesnake Flats. There's the name of it there. The air was hot and dry, and Jack and Annie peeked outside. The treehouse had landed in a lone tree on a prairie. The sun was very low in the sky, and right in front of them was the town from the cover in the book. In real life, it looked empty and spooky. To one side of the town was a patch of ground with several tombstones. I think it's creepy here, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack, taking a deep breath. So what does our riddle say? Annie held up the ancient scroll, and she unrolled it, and then she and Jack read it together. There's a really nice picture of the town. Out of the blue, my lonely voice calls out to you. Who am I? Am I? Jack pushed his glasses into place and read the riddle again to himself. I think there's a mistake here, he said. Am I is written twice. Well, I don't hear any voices right now, said Annie as she looked out the window. There were no human sounds at all, only the buzzing of flies and the whistling of a dry wind. Let's look in the book, said Jack. He opened the book and the pages were yellow with age. He found a picture of a town and he read the words beneath it out loud. In 1870, Rattlesnake Flats was the rest stop for the stagecoach that carried passengers from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Fort Worth, Texas. Then the creek dried up and everybody left the town, and by 1880, it was considered a ghost town. Wow, a ghost town, said Annie, her eyes wide. I think we should just take a quick look around so we can leave before it gets dark here. Right, said Annie, let's hurry. She started down the rope ladder. Jack put the old book in his backpack and then he followed Annie. They stood by the tree and looked about. Tumbleweeds were blowing across the dry ground. And suddenly, something jumped past them. Yikes! They both jumped. So, boys and girls, if you don't know what a tumbleweed is, it's sort of a gathering of parts of plants and into like a bit of a ball. Very dry areas, usually. Could be grasses as well. And they blow in the desert winds when there's not a lot of moisture. You kind of get plant product, trees, leaves blowing, and it's called a tumbleweed. But it was just the rabbit, a lone, long-legged rabbit hopping past them. Hey, he's just like the rabbit we saw at home, said Jack. Yeah, that rabbit must have been a sign of things to come, said Annie. The rabbit hopped across the prairie and out of sight. I think I better take some notes, said Jack. He reached into his backpack and he took out his notebook and his pencil, and he wrote, Rabbit with long legs. That sounds... What's that sound? Said Annie. I don't hear any sound, said Jack. The rattling sound, said Annie. Jack looked up. What? He said. There, said Annie, pointing to a rattlesnake. It was about 100 yards away, and it was coiled and making a rattly sound with its tail. Jack took one look at the snake and ran, and Annie did too. They ran past the graveyard and straight into the ghost town. Well, I guess that's why this town is called Rattlesnake Flats, said Annie when they stopped. Jack looked around. The town was hardly big enough to even call a town. There was one unpaved street and just a few old buildings. And it was quiet. It was too quiet. Look, a store, said Annie. She pointed to a building and the faded sign said General Store. Let's look inside. Maybe the answer of the riddle is going to be in there. So Jack and Annie stepped into the porch. The wooden boards creaked loudly as they opened the door, and it looked like the hinges were going to fall off. They peeked inside. The air was thick with dust. Spider webs were hanging from all of the ceiling. I don't think we should go in there, said Jack. But what if the answer's in there, said Annie. Can't we just take a quick look? Took a deep breath. Oh, all right. He and Annie tiptoed into the store. Look, said Annie, picking up a pair of rusty spurs. Do we know what spurs are? So spurs are something that some cowboy people put on the back of their shoe, like a pointy part, usually in a bit of a circle shape, a spur. Careful, said Jack. He poked at the other stuff in the store. There was an old feed sack and a rusted tin cup and a faded calendar that said 1878. Wow, said Annie. She held up 2 cowboy hats. She put one on and handed one to her brother. For you, she said. Oh, I don't want to wear that. It's too dusty, said Jack. Oh, just blow on it, said Annie. So Jack blew on it, and a cloud of dust went everywhere. Achoo! Said Jack. Just try it on, said his sister. So Jack put the hat on, and it nearly covered his eyes. Boots, said Annie. She pointed to a row of cowboy boots on the shelf. There are even some small ones, like our size, and there's a pair for you. She handed the boots to Jack. These aren't ours, said Jack. I know, but let's just try them on. It'll be fun, said Annie. So Jack turned his boots upside down and shook them out to be sure. What are you doing now? Said Annie, pulling on the other pair of boots. Well, I'm checking for scorpions, said Jack. Jack, Annie laughed. Try them on. Jack sighed. He pulled off his comfy sneakers and then he pushed his feet into the boots. And he pushed. And he pushed. The boots were really stiff. And finally, he got his feet inside. And then he tried to walk. Ow! Ooh, forget it, he started to say, trying to pull the boots off. What's that? Said Annie. Jack froze. Is that piano music? Said Annie. Well, maybe it's the voice in the riddle. Let's go! Jack threw his sneakers into his backpack and he hobbled in the very sore feet in the boots after Annie. There's them putting on their boots. Chapter 3 is called Player Piano. Outside, the sad tune played on. Oh, it's coming from over there, said Annie. She crept towards a building that had a sign that said hotel, and Jack limped after her. Annie slowly pushed open a swinging door. And they stepped inside. A faded light lit a piano in the corner of the room. The keys were moving up and down, but there was nobody sitting at the piano. Yikes, whispered Annie. A ghost playing the piano, she said. But suddenly, the keys were still. The air got very cold. No way, said Jack. There's no such thing as ghosts. I don't believe in them. You forgot that we saw one in ancient Egypt, whispered Annie. Yeah, but that was ancient Egypt, said Jack. Even so, his heart was racing. I'm going to look it up, said Jack. He pulled out the Wild West book and he found a picture of a piano and he read. Piano players were popular in the Old West. The piano played automatically when someone pumped the floor pedals. Later, with the help of electricity, the piano could play all by itself. Phew, said Jack. I knew there must be a good answer. It must be electric or something. Somehow it came on. Really? I didn't know that they had electricity in the Wild West, said Jack. Oh, they don't have electricity right now. No, said Jack. Then he looked at Annie. Oh, man. It might be a ghost. Let's get out of here. There's a picture of them peeking. Jack and Annie slowly backed out of the hotel. When they got outside, they heard another sound. It was hooves of horses thumping hard against the ground. A cloud of dust seemed to be moving towards the town, and as it got closer, Jack and Annie saw 3 riders, and they were herding a small band of horses. Hide, said Jack. Where? Said Annie. Jack looked around wildly, and then he saw 2 old barrows sitting outside the hotel. Let's go in there, he said. Jack and Annie hurried to the empty barrels. Jack climbed in one and tried to crunch down, but his hat wouldn't fit, so he jumped out of the barrel and threw his hat into the hotel. Mine too, said Annie. So Jack grabbed his sister's and threw it in, and then he scrambled back into the barrel just in time. Jack heard the horses thundering into town, and he peeked through a crack in the barrel and saw a blur of cowboys and horses going by. Whoa, 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 shouted the man. Jack heard the horses come to a halt. They stomped and snorted, and all they could see were clouds of dust through the crack. Dust covered Jack's nose, and he was about to sneeze, so he pinched his nose. The creek bed must have dried up, the cowboy yelled. This is a ghost town. Yep, gives me the shivers, said another. Let's camp over the rise. Jack really had to sneeze from the dust now. He pinched his nose tighter and tighter, but he couldn't stop the sneeze. So he let out a quiet achoo. What was that? Someone said. Just then, a loud whinnying sound split the air, and Jack saw a beautiful horse rear up. And when a horse rears up, they go from being on their 4 legs to rearing up being on their 2 legs. That's what reared up means. She had no rider and no saddle, just a rope around her neck. She was as red as the sunset and had a wild black mane. with a white star above her eyes. "We can't keep fighting this one, boss," the cowboy yelled. "Yep, she wants her colt," another said. "We shouldn't have left him behind." So here's a great picture of what's going on in the story right now. "He was too slow," growled the other cowboy. "We'll sell her when we cross the border." "That's terrible," thought Jack to himself. He knew Annie must be getting upset, how she always feels about animals. He just hoped that Annie wouldn't jump out of the barrel and start yelling at them. But the cowboys pulled the red horse away. The ground rang from the pounding of hooves as they galloped off. Jack and Annie stood up right away, and they watched the riders disappear from the town in a cloud of dust. The pounding finally faded, and all was quiet except for the lazy sound of buzzing flies. "They were really mean to that horse," said Annie in an angry voice. "I know, but there was nothing we could do," said Jack. His boots were still on his feet, and they were killing him. He climbed out of the barrel. "Man, I gotta get these boots off," said Jack. Jack sat down on the porch of the hotel and he grabbed one foot and he pulled and pulled. "Jack," said Annie, "I think there is something we can do." "What can we do?" said Jack. A small horse began running down the road. He was as red as his wild mother's horse, and he had the same black mane and the same beautiful white star above his eyes. A rope was around his neck, and that horse looked very lost. Till next time. Right there. Hello. Oh, it's April. I'm Miss Lyon calling from Captain Cook. Hi. How are you? I'm okay. Yeah? Good. So you guys got an iPad? It's Talia, right? Okay, Talia, sorry. Yeah, how are you guys? Yeah? Oh my gosh, hon, what happened? Just this, were you sick? Okay. Other things. Okay. Great. Oh. Yeah, well, know that, everything with Hallie is just only for what works, right, hon? Don't feel like you need to catch up and don't feel like she's behind because she's absolutely not, okay? Take that stress right off your mommy plate right now. None of that. but you're feeling better. Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Nice. So did you want some help putting her on the Raz Kids and stuff? It is. It is. So, or it might be a website. Let me just check. So, for sure, in the package that I sent you, there was an orange 3-page document. Do you still have that, maybe? Yeah. Mhm. Oh, yeah. That was an extra. Oh, that's okay. Okay. And if not, let me know. But I would search on the iPad, Raz Kids, and uh huh, and I yeah, sorry, RAZ Kids. Yeah. So let me just get. It's so much easier if I do it with you because then I'm like, and go here.